The Mind's Eye with BJ Turnoff. It's available on iTunes, Pandora, Amazon, and all major platforms. Appreciate you listening. Appreciate you subscribing. Feed your head, engage your brain, and enter the Mind's Eye. You are now standing at the intersection between history and mystery, the center of science and the strange, and your source for the subliminal to the criminal. I'm DJ BJ Turnoff, host of this auditorium of audacity. Another week, another treasure to explore. Last week we talked about a metaphorical one, but now on this one, we're going to talk about a real one: gold, silver, and knowledge, and much more. Two guests are going to be returning to talk about their personal hunt. Siblings Dan and Teresa Duke. Just to refresh your memory a little bit, we had them on about a year ago where I talked to them about their physical and anecdotal evidence supposedly proving that that not only did Jesse James fake his death, but they are actually the great-great-grandchildren of the infamous outlaw. Obviously, I highly recommend listening to that show. I mean, it's a fun little trip down a hell of a rabbit hole. Dan and Teresa, they provide some pretty interesting information supporting that idea. Although I don't think you have to listen to that episode to listen to this one. Having said that, I do think they do establish a pretty good foundation for at least the possibility. So if that's possible, then maybe what they're going to talk about on this show is as well. Regardless of whether Jesse James was actually their great-great-grandfather, their relative did leave behind secret diaries and coded treasure maps over the past few decades, starting with their late mom, who passed down all this information to them. Dan and Teresa, they've been working to decrypt these maps. On this show, the two of them, they're going to reveal what they have found, how they decoded the maps, locations of where the treasure could be, and the possible origins of the treasure. It's also featured in their book, Jesse James and the Lost Templar Treasure, Secret Diaries, Coded Maps, and the Knights of the Golden Circle. Maybe that gives it away just a little bit. I have been posting quotes from the book all week on Facebook and Twitter, including some of those spots of where the treasure might be buried. If you want to know where that is, go to the Mind's Eye website. Again, that's themindseyemedia.com, where I have links to the social media pages where you can see those quotes. Not only that, but there's a lot of nuggets of information on the site. I got a bunch of blogs on there, not to mention, of course, over 110 plus free episodes. Now, as a way of saying thank you for giving us this information about where we can find some buried treasure, why don't you leave a little bit of a donation? I made it pretty easy for you. Hit the donate button at the top of themindseyemedia.com. In return, you, of course, are going to get a little small treasure of knowledge. Everyone who donates gets a completely unaired Mind's Eye episode. And the more you donate, the more you're going to get, like copies of books from our previous guests, and some similar topics as well. I really do appreciate anyone who donates. It's hard to formulate in words how much that support really does help to keep this show chugging along. So thank you so much for everyone who does. All right, now that we got that out of the way, let's unwrap this enigma wrapped inside a mystery, stuffed inside an almond joy. Dan and Teresa Duke, come on the show now. But before we talk shop here, one of the things that I will say I appreciate meeting you guys last year, on top of just the interesting story that you told us, but was that Teresa, after we became friends on Facebook, you mentioned something about Cobra Kai,
yes.
And I was looking for a show, so I just want to thank you for that recommendation because, God, I freaking love that show.
Isn't it awesome?
Same here.
They just wrapped up their 4th season, I heard, so that should be coming out, probably, I don't know when, January maybe? We have to wait. Like, I go through the entire season within, 2, 3 weekends, and then I'm, waiting impatiently for the next one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm obsessed with it.
Yeah, just for the listeners who don't know what we're talking about, Cobra Kai is the continuation of the Karate Kid saga. It's on Netflix, and, it's cheesy in all the right spots while also kind of respecting the whole Miyagi universe. So it's very self-aware, and yeah, I can't wait for season 4. So,
Same.
so I want to thank you for that, turning me on to that one. And I know it's been a crazy year. Also, Dan, for you, I believe, if I recall correctly, maybe in the last year, you're part of the Masonic Brotherhood now. Congratulations. Is that in order?
Thank you. Yeah, I yeah, that's exactly right.
Excellent. How's the ritual work coming?
It's going good. I was raised as a master back in last October, and I've still there's a lifetime of learning. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I imagine some of the stories that we're going to talk about tonight may have kind of pushed you even a little bit further or closer or sooner to the Freemasons than maybe you would have. And we're talking tonight about a good old-fashioned treasure hunt. It's featured in Dan and Teresa's book, Lost Templar Treasure, Secret Diaries, Coded Maps in the Knights of the Golden Circle. And why don't you tell us, we're only going to go, well, we had you last year, so I don't want to go completely into that story, but we have to at least kind of lay the foundation here. So, Dan, give us a little bit of the background on how you were brought down this road and got on to the treasure hunt here.
As a child, all our life, we were told that Jesse James didn't die as history said, that he faked his death, came to Texas, and he was Teresa and I's great-great-grandfather. And, we thought that was real cool and everything. They didn't talk too much about it when we were little kids. We were too busy playing and running around. Mm. But I remember the adults would talk at the table and, at family get-togethers and things. And Mom, when we were in college, our late mother, Betty Dorset Duke, she decided to write a book. She started researching it, wrote a book about it, about her findings, and then ended up writing 3 books before she passed away. During her research, there was also a treasure map that had come down through the family, and it was passed on to Mom, and it was from Jesse's, one of Jesse's treasure maps. And the reason Mom got into it, she wanted to prove once and for all whether whose story was right and whose was wrong. Was traditional history right, and did he die, in 1882 at the hands of Bob and Charlie Ford, or did he fake his death as our family history had said, and relocated to Texas, and lived he lived to the age of 97 and died in 1943. But the treasure map that came down, I would help Mom and Teresa research, but on the side, when we would come to lulls in the research, I would get into the treasure map. And over time, we found, interviews with a former Freemason, George Roming. He was an old man. He had actually helped when he was a child and Jesse was old. He had helped Jesse bury 680 bars of gold. And he told my mother and I where that was, and it's on Fort Hood Military Reservation today. Back then, it was they buried it before the military reservation was there. And then Wagner Carr, the former Texas Attorney General for the state of Texas, had contacted my mother. He was interested in Jesse James and the history, and he sent his driver out to show us 2 other treasure locations where large treasures were recovered. And through that, I figured out their template. They had a template that they used to bury these treasures. And the template was online you'll see it called the Knights of the Golden Circle treasure template. And I found out later it's not a Knights of the Golden Circle template. It was made by Freemasons and others. I don't know who originally made it. That's the big question. But it ended up leading what started out looking for a family treasure, which I thought would amount to nothing but a couple of jars of gold or silver at most, ended up being one of the biggest treasures in history, and a network of treasures that spans the Americas.
Well, let's unpack that a little bit more. So, like I said before, this is going to be a spiritual sequel to our last episode. Let's not rehash the evidence that we talked about proving or disproving, whether your great-great-grandfather really is Jesse James or not, because for me, I think it's a really interesting story. I don't know 100%, but you're bringing enough evidence that, you definitely have to seriously consider that. So if you seriously consider that, then you have to seriously consider the claim about the treasure. But regardless of all that, your great-grandfather whether he was Jesse James or not, he did leave behind treasure maps, and there are stories about him. So your great-great-grandfather, either Jesse James or James L. Courtney, which I guess was his name after he faked his death. I mean, he used to hide cash, gold, silver around the home, but your family doesn't actually own the property anymore, right? So do we know if that is legend or fact?
Fact. When it comes to people finding it, and it's the people who have found some of it aren't going to go out and tell the world, hey, look what I found. It's on their property, and they keep.
Right.
He even recently tore the house down. We had offered to purchase the house in a half acre, just to preserve the home. The man wouldn't. He would have nothing to do with it. Didn't want to talk to anybody. He wouldn't even let a lot of his relatives on his property. They'd found cash and gold, and this is some of their family members coming to us and telling us what they had found, and what the owner had found, and I don't think they're one. Well, a lot of people, if you were to find gold and you reported it, there's no telling who would want it. I'm sure the IRS would be interested in it, and a lot of other people. So
I would imagine.
I think they kind of kept it quiet for that reason as well.
What about now? What's the status of the property now?
Same owner. Well, the owner's son now has it, and he's the original owner that we had spoke to was actually a very nice man. He didn't let people look for treasure on his property, but he was a nice man. His son wasn't so nice. He's just real. He would rather run you off real quick and be done with you, and leave him alone and get away from his property kind of attitude. So
and they tore the house down.
Yeah, he tore the house down looking for more of the more treasure. But and family stories. There were a lot of people in the family. They would go to. This was before Jesse had died, but they would they'd have family get-togethers, Christmas, things like that. And every once in a while, a kid playing in the yard would uncover a mason jar with a bunch of coins in it, full of silver dollars or gold and silver. And they would always, of course, a kid finds it. They're ecstatic. Their parents would put it, tell them to put it right back and cover it up.
And another story in the book, somewhat proving that your great-great-grandfather, James L. Courtney, Jesse James, did have treasures around, is that you mentioned before was the one with George roaming. Go into that claim a little bit more. Go into some of those details.
George had told us, we met with him quite a few times, and he told my mother and I.
And how'd you meet him originally?
He had contacted my mom. He read a Texas Monthly article she had written about Jesse. So he contacted, I think it was either after the Texas Monthly article or her first book came out. He contacted her and said, I've got a lot to tell you about your great-grandfather. And she was, so she wrote back, gave her phone number, he called, and he wanted to start meeting with us. So we would meet him at parks in Georgetown, Texas, or other places. And he showed us around the Blevins area and gave us a lot of the history of it, showed us a house that's got tunnels under it. And the house is it's close to falling over now. But he showed us a lot of things like that. And then he told us what, his part with the treasure. And he said that he was about 10 or 11 years old. Jesse asked him to, or swore him to secrecy and asked him, hired him to help him move. It was 700 bars of gold total that they moved. And they went about 18 miles from Jesse's house, met two other old men, and those old men, each of them had a boy about George's age with them. And George knew the other two boys. They had dug a 8-foot deep hole, lined it with railroad ties and timbers is what he called them, on the bottom of the hole, and then they unloaded the gold into the hole. Jesse took 20 of the bars for himself and returned home with 20. And the rest of it was buried.
And where was that location?
It's on what's now Fort Hood Military Reserve out near Killeen and Temple, Texas.
And so we have this guy, George Roman, kind of coming in. He comes out of nowhere after your mom publishes the story, and telling you
and
of
the funny thing.
No, please.
We had never really but we had never really talked with a lot of men who would just come out and say, I'm a Freemason. And, but when Mom wrote the book, a lot of Masons came out of the woodwork in that area, especially. And we found out later that Jesse was a Mason under his alias out in Falls County, Texas.
And I know, and we're gonna go into that in a moment. So we have this guy kind of coming out of nowhere after your mom publishes the book and telling you of treasure that he helped bury with Jesse James L. Courtney, or I guess it was just Jesse James at the time. So I'm just trying to establish some of his, I guess, credibility of story. So what would he benefit from telling you this story?
He had said that, well, George grew up near Grandpa. We call him Grandpa, Jesse. He grew up near Jesse, and he had told us that, he didn't really benefit from it other than he knew Jesse. You know, he was a kid. He walked by the house all the time. Jesse, I think, felt sorry for him because George's dad would beat him severely. He had lifted his shirt up, and I don't know if the old movies like Roots, where you'd see the scars on slaves' backs. George's back was that bad. His dad would beat him, and I think Jesse felt sorry for him and would give him work to do, and he'd invite him over to have lemonade in the summer and things like that. And it just they were close. They knew one another. I think Jesse trusted him. He obviously trusted him. Swore him to secrecy, and then George, from then on, he lied about his age, went to World War II. When he came back, the other two boys who had helped bury it were dead. He was the only living, and the old men were all dead, Jesse and the other two older gentlemen. And according to him, he was the only one who knew about it. He came to Mom and said there are others that he helped bury, but that one he felt belonged to Mom, or at least a part of it. And so he drew the map out for us and told us where it was. When we went to locate it, we went to, we were on the way to the spot, and it was on Fort Hood Military Reservation. So we weren't going to go any further than that.
Yeah, I would imagine that's going to stop.
That would end up in a bad way for us.
Yeah, and listeners may hear a pattern coming up every time you possibly locate a possible treasure. It may be on some type of government agency land, but they'll see that in a moment.
Sometimes I think that was planned.
It's something I did notice. So, and it was hard not to notice after a while. So.
It's a little too coincidental.
Exactly. So just what I'm doing kind of with this line of questioning here is I just want to establish for the listener that, again, whether their great great grandfather was Jesse James or not after he faked his death, that there was some type of treasure by James L. Courtney, Jesse James, and that it has been found. So it establishes some credibility for the treasure map that's been passed down as well. So that's kind of my line of thinking and with that line of questioning. So I want to dive a little bit more into the map that was passed down. Teresa, do you mind actually just describing the map to me? What do you see? If someone's looking at it, what do you see?
Well, so when you're looking at the map, you're going to see, it looks like a person on there. It's like a figure. It looks like a figure which I would say is a person. And it looks like he's wearing a top hat. And then there's a sun. It looks like a sun, but it has a face inside of the sun, like a mischievous looking face. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
Almost kind of like it's mischievous, like a mischievous expression in the sun. And then there's a bunch of symbols on there. So it's really hard to kind of decipher for me, like, where, I don't know how anyone could read the map. They'd have to be like really experts at it. Danny would, of course. I think he's been able to decipher some stuff off of it.
Before we go into decoding it, Dan, do you want to add anything on the actual description from what Teresa gave us? Because it doesn't sound like a traditional map, clearly.
No, it's not. I expect when I think of or used to think of a treasure map, I would think of, the old pirate movies. You've got a little topographic, a drawing of the topography, maybe a picture of a tree, or at least, just something with topographic markers. like 40 paces north of the oak tree, and the X marks the spot kind of thing, and it was nothing like that. It was geometric figures. It was like a rectangle with a bunch of dotted lines, a couple of solid lines, and then he had code written off to the side. And the code was easy to break. You'd just substitute letters for numbers. And sometimes he'd flip the alphabet around, so you'd have to work backwards on the alphabet. But it was easy to figure out, and he'd have, like so much in gold, so much in silver, and then he mentioned greenbacks also were buried. So it was really, it wasn't your traditional map, but it was definitely interesting. And the frustrating part about it was that it didn't have a topographic marker or any starting place. So it was kind of up in the air as to where it was. Where do you even start to look for something like that?
So well, I'm going to let you answer that question. Where did you start?
His property. And his property, I believe it was on his property. And the reason I found that out is talking to Wagner Carr, the former Texas, Attorney General, and George Roming. The spots that they had mentioned lined up perfectly with the alleged KGC treasure template, and it gave me the scale to work with. When I lined those up, the center of the template was right on Jesse's house on the map.
Wow. So you have this non-traditional map, obviously passed down to you through generations, claiming that has to be a map because there's no other way that you could decode that otherwise. You start decoding it, the hidden language that's in there, and then you found you got this template to be able to actually pinpoint where the treasure is. How did you get your hand on the template? Yeah.
The template was pretty easy to find. There's a lot of people who believe the KGC was responsible for all, just basically if you ask some of them, just about every treasure in the United States, like Victoria Peak in New Mexico, which predates the Knights of the Golden Circle, which is the KGC. It predates them by centuries at least. So, that kind of rules them out, in my opinion. If the treasure predates the formation of a group, then that kind of rules them out. But anyway, the template came from just research. I was researching. I kept coming across this treasure template, and I thought, okay, I guess this is, you're grasping at straws, especially at the beginning. I didn't know what to use, where to look. I thought maybe this will help. I don't know if it has anything to do with it or not. And it wouldn't shock me if Jesse wasn't a part of the Knights of the Golden Circle at the time of the Civil War, just because they were a Southern secret society, and their whole goal was to thwart movements of the Northern troops. And then after the Civil War, it's alleged that they wanted to fund a second Civil War and get the money by any means necessary. So I thought, okay, it's not a long stretch to think that maybe that's what Jesse was doing. But when you dig deeper into it, there's really no proof that Jesse was a part of it. There's no proof that Albert Pike and others were parts of it. All I had was the template, and I didn't even know if that worked, and it did work.
So, somewhat has to back that if everything that you're saying is true, then that actually supports the Jesse James, part of his story that isn't proven, that he was part of the Knights of the Golden Circle. And
it could be, and a lot of people would think of that as proof that he was. Or was that a ruse? If Masons were in it, they wouldn't want people knowing that they had something to do with that. And I don't think it was Masonry, or it could have been a couple of former Masons who were loyal to the South who started it up. Or there's a lot of possibilities. It could have been somebody, anytime there's a war, there's always going to be a remnant on the losing side who wants another chance. That's all they think of. They'd love to go back and have another shot at it. So maybe, knowing that that's just human nature. So maybe they used the Knights of the Golden Circle and took their money.
That's an interesting twist, because you obviously see the contradictions as a Freemason like myself, and then if being both a member of a Freemason and the KGC, a racist organization, that's a contradiction in philosophy.
Yeah, and at the time, a lot of people like mentioning, and they were a racist organization based on the way we look at things today. There's a quote I love from Louis L'Amour, is not to judge people based on the canvas of their time. Mm-hmm. The only way a person can be judged is by the people of their own times. And I try to keep that out. I try to keep, anytime I'm reading history, I always try to just get that out of my head. Any of our modern standards, I try to just set aside and just read history for the facts and not judge them. But at the same time, you're right. I don't think the Knights of the Golden Circle wanted what was best for the country as a whole, in my opinion. And that's just my opinion. I don't think they wanted what was best. I think Masonry, I think what the goals of the Knights of the Golden Circle probably went against Masonry. Or I wouldn't say probably, I'd say they did. I believe Masonry wanted the country to stay whole and united, and there was a lot of reasons behind that. But I think there is a possibility that they could have used the KGC and taken what they had. And of course, I don't have any proof on my theory. It's just a theory I've got right now. And there's a couple of theories you could work off of that. And I'd love to have all the answers. That's why I'll probably end up researching this until the day I die.
And the reason why, again, you got turned on to the KGC part is because your great-grand, if he was Jesse James, then possibly he was a member. And the other part of your research was looking into the Freemasonry aspect, because, that is a fact that James L. Courtney, your great-great-grandfather, was a Freemason, right?
Yes. Yeah, nobody mentioned in any of the family stories I heard, I never heard anybody go, "Oh, he was a Freemason."
That was in his journal.
It was in his journal, and we found out in his journal, but we also found out, verified that through the lodge members of Freemasons in the area in which he lived. Several, like George Roman, for example, he knew Jesse was a Freemason, and several other Masons around Waco in the Blevins area.
Oh yeah, and his Elmo, Danny, he gave us some of his old Masonic books.
Oh yeah.
Elmo was married to Grandpa Courtney's, James L. Courtney's granddaughter, and they lived on his farm. They were well acquainted with him, and they lived on his farm for years. And he passed down some Masonic books to me, telling me to do some research on the Masonic lodges. And he gave us a couple of his books, and then I passed them on to Danny.
Well, what did you find there? Well, I imagine you might get a little more out of it as a Mason, but Dan, for you, I imagine you're probably catching a little bit more. Did any of that material help in your research to decode the treasure map, or any research about, I guess, Freemason in general, whether related to your great-grandfather? The first book that made things start clicking, and I started connecting the dots, was reading Morals and Dogma from Albert Pike. And he got into Kabbalah and gematria and just a lot of that. And that's what I started thinking. Okay, well maybe from that led me deeper into Kabbalah, occult Kabbalah, Hebrew Kabbalah, and Christian Kabbalah throughout the ages, and just the symbolism they use, the meanings behind it that I could find, and things started clicking. I wanted to know why they used the scale they did, why the designs they used, the template. And everything, Albert Pike mentioned the beauty of symbols, and I can't quote this verbatim off the top of my head, but something about the beauty of symbols is that they oftentimes have more than one meaning. And I thought, okay, that it seemed, and everything they did seemed to have a lot of double or more meanings to it on these maps. And, at first I thought, okay, this is going to sound crazy. If I write a book about this, people are going to think I'm insane. But I'm going to go ahead and do it just because this is my findings. And I think it all made sense. And the fact that they line up with historical sites and known treasure sites around the country was, to me, evidence enough. But when Timothy Hogan, who's the Grand Master of the Knights Templar today,
when my book was published, I didn't know he was going to write the an endorsement for the book. And when he did, he had basically said, I had successfully cracked part of the mystery surrounding the Templar treasures from Jerusalem that had been moved to the Americas to establish a free nation. And he went from there. And that was all the verification I needed to know that all my work lined up with what he already knew.
Kind of just putting this together correctly, then your great-great-grandfather's treasure that we know has been found on the old property, was part of, sounds like that was also part of the map, because part of that template was pinpointing to that property, right?
That's right.
So that treasure could be part of the Knights of Golden Circle treasure or Masonic treasure, which then is also related to the Knights Templar treasure. That's also part of the Knights Templar treasure, or is that separate? Just I want to follow it a little bit.
It's part of the Templar treasure, and that's what when I realized that it was more than just an Old West outlaw's treasure. And Jesse James, he was an important part of American history in the Old West, but he was, when you view it in terms of the treasure and how big the template, the network, and all the history behind the treasures, Jesse was just one small part of a huge machine. In fact, and here's just a little trivial part. It's not really, it connects with Jesse and the Templar and stuff. In Jesse's diary, he mentions a trip that he and some of his gang members went on from Texas to Louisiana. And they went to Shreveport, Louisiana, hopped a steamship, and went south to Natchitoches, Louisiana. They got off on the Louisiana side and rode back north and stayed at a man's home. The man's name was Gervais Fontenot. And I thought, well, I need to know about this guy. So I started researching. Gervais was the nephew of Jean Lafitte, the famous pirate. And pirate/privateer. It depended on, he was robbing Spanish ships because he had a beef against the Catholic Church. So, but it also helped America at the time and our allies. So in a way, it depends on, he was a pirate to the Spanish. To us, he was a privateer. So, a lot of people just call him pirate. There was a difference. He was a pirate in our favor at the time. But anyway, Jean Lafitte had Masonic communications, and this is historical fact. He had Masonic communications with Andrew Jackson, who was later President Jackson. And I thought, well, you can't have Masonic communication unless you're a Mason. So that shows a tie with not only Jesse, an Old West outlaw, it connects the treasures and some of the activities with Jesse and Jean Lafitte, who was dead by the time, but his nephew was working with Jesse. And it's not proof, but it's a very strong coincidence, in my opinion.
And you connect it to the Knights Templars because if this treasure is Masonic treasure, and they were birthed from Knights Templar, that's how you're connecting it historically.
That and the fact that, like Francis Bacon, who is often called the father of modern day Freemasonry, and I wanted to know more. I thought when I was tracking this, it was almost like doing genealogy or a family tree, only a family tree of an organization or like-minded people. And I wanted to know, you find contacts, different people. For example, it led back to Francis Bacon. I thought, okay, this is the guy who started it all. I wanted to know where this all originated and who came up with the template. I've yet to find exactly who came up with the template, but in searching, you find it's like a family tree of people. Francis Bacon's mentor was John Dee, and he's, the original 007, famous because he used the alchemical signature that looks like 2 zeros and a 7. He was also a spy. He was an alchemist, mentor to Francis Bacon. And then you check out his mentor, and I just kept going back as far as I could. It ended up going through alchemists, famous Jewish rabbis, and it ended with a rabbi named Rashi, who was the favored court guest of Hugh de Champagne, the one of the founders of the Knights Templar. And I thought, okay, this has to. I couldn't go any further than that, and that was as far as I really needed to go. It was almost like it was strange. I still get goosebumps when I'm talking about it. So if I sound like I'm stuttering, it's because it still amazes me. When that dawned on me, I thought, okay, we've all heard of the Da Vinci Code movies and things like that, which I believe, which were based on the Holy Blood, Holy Grail books that were written about the treasures around Rennes-le-Château in France. This story is a continuation of that story. The treasures that disappeared the day and probably before that, but when the Catholic Church raided the Templar strongholds in France on Friday the 13th, 1307, I believe it was. I think I've got that date right. But when that happened, and the next, the Catholic Church and the King of France were looking for the gold. They wanted the coffers. The coffers were empty. They didn't know where the treasures went. I think a large part of them came to the Americas.
So, Teresa, Dan starts figuring all this out, makes that huge connection to the Knights Templar. He comes running into your room, sweating, stuttering like he just was, and he says, "Oh my God, James L. Courtney, our great-great-grandfather's treasure, is actually part of the Knights Templar treasure." What's your reaction, and what do you think?
I wasn't surprised because of some other surrounding events that have taken place throughout the research, just with talking with people. So, I always had an idea that it was a connection, but so I wasn't surprised about that, but I was excited that he was able to connect the dots to, to link it to the Knights Templar treasure. But I wasn't surprised.
Dan, how are you able to? So we have this treasure map that was left behind, passed down. You find this template which was able to decode it and pinpoint one particular location was actually your was your old property, family property, where treasure was known to be found. How were you able to apply the map of a local location with that template that you found to then applying it to the United States and seeing where other possible treasures that are going to be part of the Knights Templar base? How were you able to make that connection?
When I first figured out, the scale of the template, it was just one template. It's shaped, a rhombus figure. And I thought, okay, here's the template. And that was enough to awe me. But I wondered if they would stack up. Because the template itself, just one cell of the template, is like in a way, it reminds me of a grid system. So I thought, if it's a grid system, does it extend? If it does extend, I know it wouldn't, so I'm trying to not get ahead of myself. So I thought, maybe it lines up with other treasure legends that I'd heard of and different sites I knew about. So I started stacking the templates next to one another. I got on Google Earth, made a transparency of the template, and I overlaid it. And then I copied that, put one, on each side of it. And I just kept doing that, and they lined up perfectly with a lot of treasure. Not all of them, but a lot of legends I knew of and had researched in the past, it lined up perfect. It lined up with the other sites that some other places that Wagner Carr's driver had mentioned to us. And then I thought, okay, if it's not, is it more than Texas? Let's see how far this goes. And it's very tedious and time-consuming, but it was a lot of fun for me, so I just went as far as I could with it. And it lined up with Victorio Peak in New Mexico and the Los Lunas Decalogue Stone, which is a mysterious stone in New Mexico that has Hebrew writing on it. When the pioneers came across it, they asked the local Native Americans, if they knew how that got there, and they said the Native Americans basically told them it was here when we got here. So, that stone in itself has got a lot of mystery behind it. But it lined up with the Newport Tower in Rhode Island and the areas around Oak Island. And that was enough. Just the places it was lining up with perfectly blew my mind. Here's the other thing. That's one part of the template. The other part, there's still another treasure template that's in the shape of the tree of life, Kabbalistic tree of life, which overlays that. But I think the template, there's 3 templates, they're all the same shape, or 3 sizes of the grid system. There's a small, medium, and large, and they all connect. And then those overlay the tree of life template.
Yeah, man, that's what I love about your book. I loved about the book is that you, all the information and the research that you did, you put in there. You show us the map, you show us the templates, you show us how you applied it, and you point out locations of where the actual possible treasures are. I think a lot of people keep that in their bag for themselves, but I mean, you gave it out to everybody. I mean, so have you actually found any treasure?
Well, if I had, I probably wouldn't have said it, but at the same time, I am saying no. I haven't recovered a large treasure of any kind. We've been to areas where they have been recovered, and we've been shown areas where they were recovered. But after all the research I had done, when I first started, I wanted the gold. Who wouldn't want a pile of gold? But after all the research I had done, and I know this is going to sound corny and people won't believe it, I truly believe, and this is one of the main reasons I joined the Masons, I truly believe that Masons and people before the Masons, who the Masons sprang from, they came to the Americas. They were looking for a place, a new country. Basically, the realization of Francis Bacon's book, The New Atlantis. It was like a template. If you've ever read the book, it reminds me of a template for what America was meant to be, or the United States. And I think it was for the United States and the world. And I think it's too sacred, in my opinion, for any one man to have. I think it belongs to the world. I think Freemasons are the custodians of it.
Teresa, Teresa, do you actually think there's any treasure left with at least with grandfather, James' great grandfather's treasure? You think there's anything left, or it's all gone?
I don't know. In my opinion, I think that it's probably all been. That's a really good question. I think it's been collected and from other, from some of the organizations that have interest in it. So that's my opinion. There might be some treasure left out there, but I really don't. I personally don't think so. I think it's all been collected. I could be wrong, though.
Well, you hope, I imagine. I know Dan probably hopes you're wrong, too,
yeah.
Obviously.
Well,
yeah, please.
I can see where she's coming from, and I've thought the same thing, but I do think I'm fairly certain there's at least some small ones out there. There may be some large ones left. I would think the large ones would have been recovered and put in safer, more modern locations, I guess. But I do think I do truly believe there's a lot of small ones out there, and a quart jar full of gold coins, or even silver. Just the numismatic value on some ancient silver coins would be a fortune for anybody.
Yeah, there's this great quote in the book, and I think that says a lot about where both your hearts are. It says, I'd love to have some gold or silver, but searching for the answers to a mystery like this gave me a feeling of being connected to something much greater than wealth. It left me a feeling as if I shared a connection of sorts with people who lived centuries before me, and I think that says a lot about your characters and where your hearts are.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so we talked about how James L. Courtney, your great-great-grandfather, may have actually been Jesse James. We talked about the treasure maps that he's left behind and the search for the treasure itself. Is there anything? Where else is this story going for you two?
Well, I have a third book that's supposed to be released in the spring or summer. We don't have an exact date yet. The publisher let me know it'll be spring or summer of 2022. So in about a year from now. The third book will be coming out, and that one, I just wanted to wrap up some of the other a few other mysteries with Jesse, or open the door into research for deeper mysteries, but it's a little of both. His connections with other outlaws in the Old West, including Billy the Kid, Johnny Ringo, and his familial relations to people like the late President LBJ, and a man who was a shadowy figure around LBJ. His name was Billy Saul Estes, and I don't know if you've heard of him. He would be listed in history as a notorious figure. But there was a lot of, those two were related to Jesse by blood, and it shows a deeper connection and more powerful organizations behind the whole thing. I'll just leave it at that for now.
And now that I'm the third Duke sibling here, we got to make it a third, so a trilogy over here. Now I'm adopted for sure. And when you find that treasure, I expect at least a little part of that. But yeah, you truly are, a dynamic duo. I really always enjoy talking to you too. I mean, all the information we just talked about was from Dan and Teresa's book, Jesse James and the Lost Templar Treasure, Secret Diaries, Coded Maps, and the Knights of the Golden Circle. We're going to have them on, it sounds like a year from now or so. And I really appreciate just both of your time talking about, these personal stories and the research that you did.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
We're just so grateful that you have us on your show. So thank you.
On the next edition of The Mind's Eye, we're going to move away from looking for lost treasures to searching for lost civilizations. Based on recent archaeological discoveries, next week's guest, J.D. Kenyon, he's going to reveal evidence for forgotten, highly advanced civilizations at the end of the last ice age. We're also going to dive into the myth of Atlantis. Until then, be well and let well be. I'm DJ BJ Turnoff, signing off for The Mind's Eye.